Chapter 8, The Freudian Wave. Now, just a quick aside before we start this, I don't usually read ahead, but I have read this section ahead, and it's just as well I did because there are certain things that need to be mentioned. There are certain things about potentially race and religion and sort of history that it may be problematic, may trigger some people. Whilst he was a futurist, and in 1970, when this was written, he was talking about the future, he also talks about the past and about the current environment that he's living in. He uses language that was used at the time that we have since moved on from. He talks about attitudes that were prevalent at the time that we have since moved on from. So, I mean, as much as this is about the future, he also talks about the past, and he was living in the past. What was present to him is the past to us, and thus it is a historic document that I'm reading. For instance, as a woman, I cringe every time he talks about he, him, his, because in effect he is airbrushing out 50% of the population. When he's talking about humanity, he says man. So that's just an example. There obviously are other examples while he talks about races and religions that, again, as I say, are problematic. Also, another point here is he's going to be talking about quite a lot about child rearing, attitudes to child rearing, and the changing attitudes to child rearing. And he's actually talking about nature and nurture, but these are not the terms that were used then. Don't seem to be the terms that were used then. He's talking about heredity and environmentalism, when he means nature and nurture. So whenever he says environmentalism, he actually means nurture. So anyway, the Freudian wave. Much new knowledge is admittedly remote from the immediate interests of the ordinary man in the street. He is not intrigued or impressed by the fact that a noble gas like xenon can form compounds, something that until recently most chemists swore was impossible. While even this knowledge may have an impact on him when it is embodied in new technology, until then he can afford to ignore it. A good bit of new knowledge, on the other hand, is directly related to his immediate concerns, his job, his politics, his family life, even his sexual behaviour. A poignant example is the dilemma that parents find themselves in today as a consequence of successive radical changes in the image of the child in society and in our theories of child rearing. At the turn of the century, and when he refers to this, he means the turn of the 20th century, from the 19th to the 20th. At the turn of the century in the United States, for example, the dominant theory reflected the prevailing scientific belief in the primacy of heredity in determining behaviour. Mothers who had never heard of Darwin or Spencer raised their babies in ways consistent with the worldviews of these thinkers. Vulgarised and simplified, passed from person to person, these worldviews were reflected in the conviction of millions of ordinary people that bad children are a result of bad stock, that crime is hereditary, etc. In the early decades of the century, these attitudes fell back before the advance of environmentalism, nurture. The belief that environment shapes personality and that the early years are the most important created a new image of the child. The work of Watson and Pavlov began to creep into the public ken. By ken, he means knowledge. Mothers reflected the new behaviourism, refusing to feed infants on demand, refusing to pick them up when they cried, weaning them early to avoid prolonged dependency. A study by Martha Wolfenstein has compared the advice offered parents in 7 successive editions of Infant Care, a handbook issued by the US Children's Bureau between 1914 and 1951. She found distinct shifts in the preferred methods for dealing with weaning, thumb sucking, masturbation, bowel and bladder training. It is clear from this study that by the late 1930s, there's still another image of the child had gained ascendancy. Freudian concepts swept in like a wave and revolutionised child-rearing practices. Suddenly, mothers began to hear about the rights of infants and the need for oral gratification. Permissiveness became the order of the day. Parenthetically, at the same time that Freudian images of the child were altering the behaviour of parents in Dayton, Dubuque, wherever that is, and Dallas, the image of the psychoanalyst changed too. Psychoanalysts became cultural heroes. Movies, television scripts, novels, and magazine stories represented them as wise and sympathetic souls, wonder workers capable of remaking damaged personalities. From the appearance of the movie Spellbound in 1945 through the late 50s, the analyst was painted in largely positive terms by the mass media. By the mid-60s, however, he had already turned into a comical creature. Peter Sellers in What's New Pussycat played a psychoanalyst much crazier than most of his patients. And psychoanalyst jokes began to circulate not merely among New York and California sophisticates, but through the population at large, helped along by the mass media, the same mass media that created the myth of the analyst in the first place. This sharp reversal in the public image of the psychoanalyst, the public image being no more than the weighted aggregate of private images in the society, reflected changes in research as well. For evidence was piling up that psychoanalytic therapy did not live up to the claims made for it, and new knowledge in the behavioural sciences, and particularly in psychopharmacology, made many Freudian therapeutic measures seem quaintly archaic. At the same time, there was a great burst of research in the field of learning theory, and a new swing in child rearing, this time towards a kind of neo-behaviourism, got underway. At each stage of this development, a widely held set of images were attacked by a set of counter-images. Individuals holding one set were assailed by reports, articles, documentaries and advice from authorities, friends, relatives and even casual acquaintances who accepted conflicting views. The same mother, turning to the same authorities at two different times in the course of raising her child, would receive in effect somewhat different advice based on different inferences about reality. While for the people of the past, child-rearing patterns remain stable for centuries at a time, for the people of the present and the future, it has, like so many other fields, become an arena in which successive waves of images, many of them generated by scientific research, do battle. In this way, new knowledge alters old. The mass media instantly and persuasively disseminate new images, and ordinary individuals seeking help in coping with an ever more complex social environment attempt to keep up. At the same time, events, as distinct from research as such, also batter our old image structures. Racing swiftly past our attention screen, they wash out old images and generate new ones. After the freedom rides and the riots in black ghettos, only the pathological could hang on to the long-cherished notion that blacks are happy children, content with their poverty. After the Israeli Blitz victory over the Arabs in 1967, how many still cling to the image of the Jew as a cheek-turning pacifist or a battlefield coward? In education, in politics, in economic theory, in medicine, in international affairs, wave after wave of new images penetrate our defences, shake up our mental models of reality. The result of this image bombardment in the accelerated decay of old images, of faster intellectual throughput, and a new profound sense of the impermanence of knowledge itself. See what I mean? See what I mean about those problematic ideas and language. So that's the end of the section entitled "The Freudian Wave."